Hi, welcome back to What Did You Learn? I'm Ahava Leibtag, and I am very excited to have with me today a very long-time colleague and friend, Margot Bloomstein. Margot is the principal of Appropriate Inc., and she is also the author of a brand new book that I am so excited to discuss with her and with you. It's called Trustworthy, How the Smartest Brands Beat Cynicism and Bridge the Trust Gap. And the cover of the book is like a trapeze, like trying to grab each other's hands. I think it's just perfect. It's right behind Margot there. Margot, welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be speaking with you.
Yeah, we have been friends forever, it feels like.
Yes, yeah. I mean, since it's got to be like 10 years or so.
Yeah, since 2011, 2012. Yeah. I actually accosted Margot in the hallway of the Hyatt at Confab and asked her when she was going to have a baby. So that was really great conference behavior.
But really, is that any different from how you've met anyone else? I mean,
I just want to say
that was me. I think that was me, but
I'm a Jewish future grandmother who wants to be a bubby now. I am a bubby to Clover.
Touche.
To the baby that Margot had after I drove her crazy about having a baby. So anyway, I want to dive into the book because I'm super excited to discuss it with you. But before we do that, my listeners love to hear like what happened to you during the pandemic. So you and I touched a little bit. You love this custard, and I like lust after it on Instagram and Facebook when you post pictures.
Custard, ice cream, all the dairy products.
All the dairy products. So, but you told me you really like to go out for ice cream. You didn't bring any in during the pandemic. But you said while you were writing the book, what did you eat?
So many Cheez-Its. Like, I'd love to say like this book was sponsored by Cheez-It. It wasn't, but maybe it should have been. Like buying in like the club sizes, because I thought, oh, then I'll just eat like a small pre-portioned bag. Turns out when you've got like one bag of Cheez-Its in your stomach, it wants friends. It's like, oh, hey, more Cheez-Its. Come on down. Yeah.
Yeah, but you need to.
Like nitrates went in and words came out. So thank you, Cheez-Its, for making this possible.
Whatever works. Maybe we can get a co-sponsor for a podcast. So, okay. So this book is fascinating to me, and I read, sort of some of the pre-copy. What do you call it? The pre-publishing copy.
Yeah.
And
advanced review copy. Yes.
Right. Exactly. And I was sort of fascinated because this is one of the things I've really been exploring during the pandemic is how I really think that brands made a huge mistake at the beginning and sent all the emails and all the communications, and it just felt very forced. Like, I don't need to know what my Honda dealership is doing about COVID. Like, that wasn't the first thing on my mind. And then I feel like during the Black Lives Matter movement and the social injustice sort of causes that we saw around the summertime last year, that brands actually figured it out and became much more authentic, that they realized that they really needed to start having these more trustworthy conversations. And you were obviously writing the book during that time period. So how did seeing that shift sort of change your thesis? Did it change what you were thinking, or did you find even more examples of where brands were going wrong?
I think I was finding even more examples. And I think that was kind of one of the, I don't know if thrilling is the right word, but it was kind of one of both the thrilling and jarring realizations in writing the book, that this thesis that had been percolating for me for about 4 years, because I started researching this around 2015, 2016, this thesis of how brands can foster trust, and should they be in the business of trying to foster trust? Do they need to empower their audiences? Should they be wading into this kind of space? I was starting to see more and more examples that were confirming my original ideas. And my editor at one point, I think he described it as, like that path that we are treading is getting deeper and deeper with more and more examples. Not to say that all brands are doing this, but I think we're starting to see many smart organizations across industries and at a range of different sizes, because you don't have to be a big brand, I think, to embrace this kind of thinking and do it well. We're starting to see how they realize the value in putting skin in the game, in expressing their values openly, in making their values visible, and bringing vulnerability to that experience. And that for all the lip service that they've been paying to this idea of authenticity, this is how you act authentic. Authenticity is bringing together your values and your actions to the point that there is no space in between them. And I think smart brands and organizations are realizing that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, the bulk of our work is done in healthcare. And so what we're seeing is that hospitals and healthcare organizations had to make a decision around Black Lives Matter. Are we willing to have this conversation openly? And I think the ones that did reaped a huge amount of benefit, both in the public eye and their employees' eyes. And then I think that there were organizations that decided sort of either to sort of gloss over it or not really bite down into the issue. And I think that that obviously causes ripples as well. But so you talk something about the book that I've never actually heard anyone talk about, which I don't know if I'm missing something, but you talk about voice and then you talk about volume. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I've never really come across that concept before in content and content strategy, and I was sort of really fascinated by it.
Sure. So when I talk about voice, I mean visually and verbally, what is the consistent, familiar kind of vernacular that you develop with your audience? What is the way that you frame that kind of rhetorical arena so that they understand your personality and what your organization represents in a way that that isn't surprising, that doesn't throw them for a loop? And how do you do that again and again and again across platforms, across channels, regardless of who is the content creator? And so that's voice. And sometimes we also talk about tone in that context. And certainly in writing this book, I had interviewed Nicole Fenton and Kate Kieferly in their respective organizations, but also they're the co-authors of Nicely Said. And they talk a lot about how we differentiate between voice and tone and kind of dial it up for different contexts and audiences. I also looked at, as you said, volume, or how much do we need to say? What is the volume of information that we need to share in terms of length and level of detail? Again, visually and verbally, because in some organizations, it makes sense for their brand, for their message architecture. It makes sense for their audience to communicate in a lot of detail. Their diagrams are really nuanced. Their instructions are long and have lots of ifs and thens and whatnot. And they're known for that, maybe that level of empowering detail. And then in other organizations, you see how they take a more pared back approach. Maybe all of their imagery is much more streamlined. They're not adding a lot of like fuss and foppery to their typography. And also they speak in a more streamlined way. Details are minimal. They leave a lot more white space in the conversation for their audiences to kind of fill in the details as they need. And I think it kind of gets at that question of, well, how much should you say? What's the right length for a blog post? How frequently should your organization be tweeting? And when we talk about frequency and length and level of detail, there's no one right answer. But what I learned in writing this book and speaking with different organizations and speaking with different creative directors and designers and folks in customer service was that you've offered enough information when your audience can make good decisions and feel good about the decisions they make. You can measure that in things like consumer confidence and patient surveys.
Can you measure when they don't make good decisions? So I'm thinking about what you're saying about the white space and the line. So I just interviewed a writer today to join our media group, and I asked her, she's a financial services writer and a healthcare writer, and I asked her, what do the two have in common? And she's like, details. People need a lot of details to make choices about their healthcare, about their financial services. It affects their future. It affects their lives. And you're saying some brands need to figure out what their volume is and maybe they pull back on their volume. But then we know that then people make a causal leap, right? They're going to fill in the blanks because that's what we're designed to do. So, and you're saying a brand knows when people can make decisions, but how does a brand know when people don't make decisions based on their content or feel stuck?
Well, I think we can measure it around things like time on site. If there's cart abandonment, if they keep revisiting the same pages before they're ready to maybe call a specialist, or if they keep revisiting the same pages in hopes of getting information about a patient account and they don't seem to fully accomplish that. I think we can easily measure that in more consumer contexts too, when we see like a high rate of product returns. Those are people saying, I made a decision, but it wasn't right, or it wasn't right for me, or I wasn't confident in that decision. And I think that there's, and it is not objective, but I think there's more to be said in people's confidence about their decisions than actually if they've made the right decision, because that can be a subjective thing. And it isn't so much about making the right decision as it is making the right decision for them and for that moment and context.
Yeah, I love that confidence idea. That really makes a lot of sense to me. That because I do think like one of the ways that they measure it in hospitals is how many call center calls do they get, right? And they can track those, and that lets them know, okay, this content wasn't appropriate, or it didn't make people feel confident because they had to call a human being to find out what to do.
Right, right. And I would also push back on the idea that people in, whether it's in healthcare or financial services, always need lots of information to make a decision, because I think that that's probably something that it depends on where they are on that user journey. Maybe early on, they just need imagery that shows them, oh, these are people having good outcomes from the same decisions with which I'm wrestling. Maybe later on, they need to know, well, wait, who's the specialist to go to? How do I compare different specialists? Or how do I learn more about a particular surgery or a particular therapy? Give me all of that kind of detail. And then later on, they may be able to revisit that and say, I don't need all that anymore. Right now, my gut is just telling me, all right, how do I move forward on this? What
Right.
is the next best thing I need to know?
Well, what we talk about is the bite snack meal, right? Like the classic, like give them a little bit, lead them along the path. At some point, they will feel confident enough to make a decision based on however much they want to know. Okay, so I want to turn. I want to talk about, what you talked about, like the volume and when each brand has to decide that for themselves. So I had a fascinating conversation with David Dylan Thomas. We're both friends with Dave, and he talked about that systems, the way they're designed, that's the way the system, if the system is successful, it's designed that way. And he talked a lot about racism and, when, if it's working, that means that it's working and that's the way it was designed to work.
Mm.
Talk to me about a brand that isn't developing trustworthiness and why they might approach it that way. In other words, if you're saying that volume truly is making that decision for every brand, are there brands that it's better for them not to show up and say exactly what they want to say? Or in the case of the FBI, you might say like they're better off not giving all the detail because that's not something they want the public to have. So can you talk a little bit about the opposite premise? Like what if my hypothesis back to you was there are brands that shouldn't be trying to create trust the way that we define it?
Well, I mean, it's a kind of an interesting point, because I think for some organizations, they want to create trust, but they also maybe want to maintain dependency. And
I
this
love
is
that.
kind of like in reading the book, like I don't like digging into and elevating the bad examples, because I feel like it's easy for us to kind of gather around them and pick things apart, but it doesn't necessarily create the best learning opportunity, because we're not necessarily seeing behaviors or examples that we want to replicate. But that said, I think there are organizations where they want to maintain that dependency. And maybe it's because what they're trying to sell or the idea that they're trying to promote is so complex that they want to make sure that people do still pick up the phone to get more information. They don't want people to feel entirely empowered. And the opposite of dependency is empowerment. And when you have an audience that feels entirely comfortable and confident in their own ability to do research, to make decisions, that they will feel good about those decisions, in their own ability to continually learn, they are empowered. And that's a feeling and a skill set and a belief that I think they can then bring into other parts of their lives as consumers and citizens. And that's what I think is the real opportunity for brands here, regardless of the industry in which you work or how narrow your window is on marketing and copywriting. If you can affect change there and empower your audience, that's something that they can bring through the rest of their kind of space as consumers and citizens.
Right.
And that's, I think, how we repair society. But
That's a big jump.
Yeah. Well, no, I think when we all start doing the things that we can do, if we take that step back and say, all right now we're in a space where people feel like they can't make good decisions. They're easily swayed by gaslighting and disinformation and misinformation. So what do? That didn't happen overnight. It was a lot of little efforts that added up. Well, I think also a lot of our little efforts can help build back from that point so that people do regain that sense of confidence and are not so susceptible to gaslighting by politicians or the media or by any other kind of organization that says, don't do your own research, don't trust the evidence of your own eyes, just pay attention right here. Because that's a dangerous place to be in, but I think that we can affect change there. And I think for the organizations that are not willing to empower their audiences, that do want to just continue to maintain dependency, sometimes it works out for their benefit because they want to make sure that people are still engaging in a way that they have human contact, maybe. But by and large, what I've seen is that organizations that maintain dependency or look to maintain dependency eventually lose their audiences because people go elsewhere to other websites, other venues, other points of contact where they can feel more self-sufficient.
So tell me what, if somebody's going to read your book and they're going to say, I need to give this to my manager or to my executive, what are like the three main points that they can give to that person to say, this is why you should read this book?
I would say the message to bring to your organization, to your manager, to your CEO, to the CMO, is that the world is changing and we are part of the world. And if we want to bring our customers, bring our constituents and our audiences closer, maybe invest more in earning their loyalty, if we want to make them stronger advocates for our organization, but also for themselves in how they're deciding to do business with us, let's invest in how we earn their trust. We can be a sort of business as a force for good. Communication can be a force for good by offering people a consistent experience. Now is not the time for big changes that will make your audience feel unsettled and disconnected, because we have a lot of other things causing us to feel unsettled and disconnected. We don't want to add to that, but we can invest in developing a consistent voice, developing the right volume of information so that people can make good decisions and feel good that they're making those decisions with us.
Margot, where can people find you? You just told us where to find the book and they should definitely go pre-order it, but where can they find you?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at mbloomstein. Also appropriating.com/trustworthy. That's where you can find out more about the book, sign up for the newsletter, see how you can kind of get some free excerpts and chapters to start reading as well.
And are you inviting brands who want to have this discussion with you and maybe be featured in your newsletter as well?
Definitely, because I think that this is an area where we're seeing more and more smart organizations across the spectrum that are realizing this is how we have better relationships with our audiences, with our customers, with our potential employees, and with our society. And I definitely want to elevate those organizations.
Yeah, it's an ongoing conversation. Well, thank you so much for being here. It's great to see you and great to have you. And we'll talk again soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you.